Hi guys, welcome to this webinar number 3. This is about less than 6 true big blind shoves. What's important here is a few things. We're going to look at ante sizes. Puyan didn't even know this like 30 minutes ago, which is interesting. We're going to look at stuff like interpreting true big blinds in a different manner. We're going to look at pot size bets using M, like Dan Harrington, old school style. And then we're going to look at the context of the hand that we're in when we make a shove. And then we're going to look at one hand at the end where I think the hero, who in these hands is all Morton, I think where Morton makes a really, really interesting kind of shove where he takes into consideration all variables in the hand and makes a play. So I'm going to start up at the top here with ante sizes. And this is really interesting because especially when you're at full tables, even a small difference in the ante can make somewhat of a significant difference in your shove range. And so here are the 5 blind levels. Well, I guess 4 of these are affected. But here are the different antes at blind levels. The first number represents 45 mans. The second number represents 180 mans. This is really interesting. Out of all 4 of these levels, the 600 blind level is the only one that has the same ante amount. And that's really interesting. Especially at the 400 blind level, in 180s we talk about how that ante where it's 50 in comparison to the 200 small blind. So an ante that's 1/4 of the small blind, how that makes a drastic difference in your range overall. 45 mans, not the case. And that's something to pay attention to. The 600 blind level is the same. In this one right here, big blind 800, we can see up here with the ante 75. This is our indication that it's a 180 man. Luckily, Morton labeled them all at the bottom with notes, so that helps. But this is a big deal because if the ante is 50, is TeamViewer still frozen? Okay, cool. You can see me moving. Okay, so back to where we were. I was saying, if you had like 3,600 or somewhere around there where either you're still deep enough to shove, which would be probably like 2,400 chips or more, which is like 3 normal big blinds, where you're still deep enough to have folding equity, and that comes from like 3-2-1 theory. If someone needs 3 big blinds to fold, then we need 3 big blinds to make people fold. So if you had anywhere from like 2,400 to say like 36, 37, maybe 4,000, you could consider shoving any 2 here just because there's a 50% reward for you shoving since it's half your stack. And it's also the shorter you get towards 2,400, it becomes an inflection point where it's more important to shove. Obviously, you're shoving into a lot of people, so it does decrease in value because the probability of you getting called increases. However, you still could shove ATC. And you can interpret that as 2M or 2 pot size bets or double the pot or 50% of your stack is in the pot, however you want to think about it. And so if you have slightly over 2 pot size bets, and again, this is the same thing as true big blinds, we're just thinking about it in a different way. If you have slightly over 2, you can shove about 80% or 100 from late position. So for example, in this hand, you have somewhere around 3, so you can probably shove maybe 60% of your hands. If you had like 2.5 times the pot, that would be like 4,500, 4,600. You could probably shove about 80% of your hands. And you could also get those same ranges from thinking about true big blinds too, because now you're kind of in here. Okay, so now we get to actual hands here. So we will start with hand 12. Okay. So this is really important. Someone tell me the situation we're in here, like if you had to describe it. You are very, very pessimistic. Yes, I like that. So there's a silver lining. And I'm not talking about 9-4. I mean the situation. And nothing to do with 9-4. Let's block this. There's your situation. Hint, yes. Yeah, that's a good hint. And luckily for us, Morton told us where this is. And the stack sizes kind of show us there might be a hint. Someone said because the big blind is so deep. It's very rare to see a big blind that deep in a normal structured 180. But, what is it, Dottie? Are you getting ISO shoved again? Okay, after the webinar. Right, so Chris says there's about 50 players left. We need chips, but we're still breathing. I agree that you're still breathing. I want to know what Dottie says, and then I'll... Oh, so he says, so if we don't shove and we get small blind, the small blind, this Miss Millen is deep when we're BVB versus them. Now, are we going to get folded around when we're BVB? That would take a lot of people to fold. You might not even get the opportunity, but that is something worth mentioning here. I mean, look how many chips that this person has. Look how many chips the big blind has. Puyon says that other chip stacks are similar, though, so you can get more future spots. That's true. But I have a question for you now. Chris said there's about 50 players left in the game. Morton said hint, stage of the game. What do you think is wrong with what Chris said here in relationship to what Morton said about stage of the game? I think Chris is on to something. Ah, very good, sir. And you can tell that, well, Morton gave us a hint right here. But I didn't even see that when I was reviewing with him. But I didn't see anything because I'm usually stupid. But what's interesting is that you might be able to have a tell just based off stack sizes here. But see, do you see, though, how this is kind of a trick question in a way? Here, I'll still block the card, sorry. It's kind of a trick question because we're saying, okay, what's your situation here? And then, like, Chris is really smart. He goes, oh, there's about 50 players left. We need chips. We're still breathing. But that's because in a normal 180 at this point, there'd be about 50 players left, and you'd have slightly under an average stack size. You know, the average stack at this point might be like 6,000, 6,500. The average stack size in a $3 rebuy at this point has got to be like 10K, 11K, and there's not 50 people left. There might be like 100 people left at this point. So you have further to go, and you need more chips because there's like 700,000 chips to win this thing versus a normal one, which is 270, right? Can we get Neil in here? Neil just logged online. Cool. So the thing is, if based on the situation, just the idea of you need more chips, you're further back from the average stack, does that make you want to shove tighter or wider? Overall, not just necessarily in this specific hand, but overall. I agree with that. It should, because the context of the hand suggests that you should shove wider. Now, from under the gun, maybe we can still be tight because you're shoving into 8 players, right? Well, or relatively tight, because we're definitely loose when we shove. But this is a spot where when you're in late position, you should be more likely to shove extra wide because you need more chips, right? Now, hey, Chris, you're just doing like the regular 180s. You haven't started doing the $3 rebuy ones yet, right? I don't think so, right? Yeah. So like when you start adding in $3 rebuys, you can kind of change the way you interpret these hands. Maybe under the gun, we can still have our normal range because we're under the gun. But when late position comes around, you got to shove wider than normal. Now, it's not something like you should go memorize a wide range. Who is that? It just means that we should be more willing to get involved. You should feel that you want to be wider here. So I would still fold 9-4. Let's see, our true big blinds here, you have about 4.5, right? So we said that's about almost ATC or ATC from late position, right? So maybe from here, we're looking at, say, like 70% of hands, something like that, but more value towards good suited hands like 9-5 suited, 9-6 suited, 5-4 suited, stuff like that. Neil, I think your mic is on. So maybe like Queen 8, Queen 5 suited at the widest, and then those other hands that we said. Okay, so now we go back to the hand we already had up, and now we see a similar situation, even though your hand is obviously stronger. The blinds are 6-12. You have just under 5 true big blinds. You could call it 4.5, just like the other one, but totally different situation, right? Not only are the blinds larger, but you're deeper into the game, right? It makes a difference, like in a situational sense. Here, there's 30 people left. In the other one, there was 100 people left, right? Which means that picking up pots now are more significant. Any questions about those two hands at all? There we go. Okay, so moving on here. So now let's look at another hand with the same type of stack size, but in a different context, okay? So tell me, I know, yes, he said it right here, but tell me things that you guys notice about the context of this hand. Good. What else? Oh, wait. Is it? It is. Miss Friedemans, yes. What else is important in this hand? All right, I'll start deleting it. Right, that's really important. See, two guys are smaller. Now, I know we talked about like double theory before, but I don't really think that applies so much to these particular games. But what's interesting is since you're one person away from the money and these two guys are shorter, it suggests that we should just be more careful. It doesn't mean that we should be all tight and be afraid of ICM. It just means that we should be a little bit more cautious. So I was telling Morton yesterday, like I would probably shove 10-8 suited here still, maybe 10-7 suited, 9-8 suited, 9-7 suited, because those hands at least run a lot better than 10-3 suited. But if you made this a 180 man, first of all, the antes would be bigger at this point, right? Like what we talked about, it'd be 125 instead of 75, so it would be more reason to shove. But if this was a 180, the context in which this hand occurs would be much different. At this point, it would probably be like 17 or 16 handed in the tournament, and your stack relative to everybody else's stack would be much, much smaller. Here, you're kind of slightly below the average stack, but since we're at the final table, we can actually see all the stack sizes. I mean, you are in 4th place here, tied in 4th. you're not fourth place in a 180 man with 16 or 17 people left. You're in like 15th or something like in a 180 because the context of the hand is different. But take this in a 45, and based on the situation, it seems like it's a fold. So 10-8 suited, 9-7 suited, probably somewhere there at the worst, maybe 8-7 suited at the worst, and hands like Ace-8, Ace-5 suited, King-10, King-9 suited, stuff like that. Makes a good fold. Any questions about that? It's all about context of the hand. Okay. So now, what's the next one? Hand 9. So then we get this hand right here. Someone tell me the context of this hand. Hint, the ante is exactly the same. So, never mind, you probably already saw that. Delete. The ante is the same, so we get no difference there. Someone tell me the context of this hand. Good. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So now we get into these hands where it's like these fake final table bubbles. And these kind of exist in, actually they do exist in 180s too. So this is helpful for that as well. Think about it, Chris, like when you get 10-handed in a 180 man, it doesn't really matter if you bust 10th. It kind of doesn't really matter if you bust 9th, 8th, 7th, 6th, because either way, you didn't win a lot of money. So it really doesn't matter because the payouts are so top heavy, you know? So, but what happens is like these psychological final table bubbles, and maybe it's caused by like what televised poker kind of creates in the minds of people, like the final table, you know, like it's some glorious thing or something, but really you win like no money for getting 10th to 9th place. It's like barely anything, you know, unless you're in some like mega massive MTT, then it would be totally different. But in the games that we play, there's not that much of a difference. Yeah, the 180 November 9. Yeah, man, bet people would be so tight when there's 10 people left. But you know what's interesting about 10 people left in the main event? Don't they merge to a full table, right? So you have less late position raises. I'm not one to talk. I'd probably get destroyed if I played that. But anyway, but what's interesting here is that now it's 3-6, but with about 12, 13, 14 people left, right? So since there's 6 people at this table, I guess 12 or 13. Or 11 if there's 5 on the other table. But what does that say about our shove ranges? Well, does it mean we should be wider probably because we're approaching the bubble? It also means we should be wider because with shorter handed tables, the blinds wrap around faster, right? And that's really interesting here. But in a situation like this is a great example, like we've all talked about this before, where we would want to shove wide, but we want to shove wide diagonally, right? These types of hands that are so beautiful and pretty, and we want to stay away from these vertical hands down here because these are kind of the worst ones to shove, right? And these, I mean, the suited ones, these are better. But if I had to choose, I would choose 5-4 suited, then I would choose King Deuce suited, then I would choose King Deuce offsuit if I had to place an order on it. So this is a great example of shoving wide diagonally. So a good range here might be like 7-6 offsuit plus, something like 5-4, 5-3 suited plus, a lot of suited face cards, a lot of good connectors, and then maybe some like King 7s, Queen 8 offsuits, stuff like that. So we're shoving wide, but we shove wide diagonally. So he folds here, which is cool. So let's look at another one. Someone tell me about this situation. Probably you saw it before I deleted it. Yeah, exactly. So now we're at a final table, so we have to go through many other people. The antes are smaller, so it's a 45 man. But imagine this. if you didn't know what this said down here, and you didn't know the difference between the antes, this looks just like a normal 180, right? Like this looks exactly like a 180. And if this was a 180, it's a different stage of the game, right? It's kind of similar to before, right? There's 30 or 40 people left at this point. And if this was a 180, I would snap jam this. Because the antes would be bigger. This is what the antes are: a full table, 400, 800, and a 180. Look, aren't these hands like exactly the same? Look at this: 5688 under the gun, 400, 800. 5664 under the gun, 400, 800. But the fact that you change the context that the hand occurs in is completely different from one another. If this was a 180, man, this is a snap shove, and in a 45, man, it's a snap fold. This is the bottom of my range too. I'd probably do 8-7 suited, or sorry, 8-7 offsuit is definitely a shove. 8-6 is probably really close. Like if someone folded 8-6, I don't think it's a mistake at all. But I'd be shoving like 9-5 suited, 9-6 suited, stuff like that. 6-5 suited, maybe like 5-4 suited sounds good, and like 8-7 offsuit, 7-6 offsuit, and probably 8-6 offsuit. Wow, you shove 4 deuce? Well, this is where like 7-6 offsuit, 8-7 for sure. And then since 8-6 is like one card higher than 7-6, I guess I shove it. Yeah. But change the context now, and now it's a snap fold because it's a different table. Yeah, 6-5 is a fold. Great fold here. So these hands are kind of cool. You only have 24 chips different. Pretty cool. Okay, now let's go to this one. This is I'll tell you the situation. This is what I call the you're so far from anything type of situation. This is a 45, man, so you are closer to the money than in a 180. But it's big blind 300. You don't really have a stack. You're so far from anything. There's tons of time left. You're not dead, but you're still breathing, like Chris said before. Yeah. Yeah, you're last. You're not necessarily last in the tournament, though, but yeah, you're definitely last at this table. Yeah, I'm curious. How many of you shoved this right here? Wow. I'm a nit. Wow. So this is really interesting because if you do look, this is really interesting because me and Morton talked about this a lot. This is a time where something that we've talked about in our sessions is, well, look at these true big blinds. It's about 200, 400. You have 4.5 big blinds. So according to this, it's almost ATC. ATC from late, but almost ATC from here, right? Which I guess, yeah, almost ATC. Okay. Yeah, I need better internet. Okay, can you see the screen still? Like, does it move? Okay. So basically, what me and Morton talked about is even though you have 4.5 true big blinds, when it's really, really early in the game and I don't think I ever said this phrase, but this is basically what I was explaining to him. When it's really early in the game and you're just so far from anything, like really early in the game, get tighter with your early position ranges. So let's say from EP, be tighter. And this is just an example of another way to interpret the context that this hand occurs in. You're so far away from anything, you're under the gun, just fold. The justification, I guess, like Space Gravy said it. That's a bad excuse. It's just because, well, let me see. But from the other side, after blinds, we were so small. Well, yeah, you do have folding equity after the blinds hit you. I agree. But when it's so early, here's a good reasoning. The earlier you are in the game, the more likely it is that someone potentially could call you because the money is less tangible. And so if you increase people's calling ranges, you decrease your shoving range. Does that work? But Prion has a great point. Joe, it's my dog. Prion has a point. He says, logically speaking, if you're way behind everybody else, you should be more willing to gamble. And I agree with that a lot. So, and maybe it's not so much like, I'm not shoving tight here. I'm just getting rid of the hands that flop like shit. Like 10-5, Jack 6 offsuit, gross. But you give me 10 deuce suited, okay, it's suited, sure. Jack deuce suited, sure. It's like we're widening our range to like maybe 70%, 60, 70, 80, but we're doing it with the hands that flop better. Because remember, these percentages we're saying these are just arbitrary numbers. Like, I don't really know exactly what they mean. You know, we're looking for diagonally distributed hands. That could be how you balance. Shove if you have the 10 of spades, fold if you don't. So Chris says, even if we double up 4 hands later, we're still in bad shape. That's very true. Says maybe it depends on other things. Like, who is the big blind? Yeah, I could see that. Like, is the big blind a guy who's going to call? Now can you hear me? Okay, we're almost done anyway. One thing, usually when you shove into a full table, even if everybody calls you 10% of the time, you'll still get called 52% of the time by somebody, which is important. So I'd be going like 10-5 suited there. Seems good though. Okay, so then last hand we're going to talk about is this one right here. That's all you know. $7.45, man. Tell me everything that you see. 10 left, good. And you know what I like about thinking about stuff like that? Is that means that if someone loses here or the other table, you get put at a full table, you have less opportunities to steal. So that's like probably if you were at WSOP, they break at 10 tables to a full table, so you should go at 11-handed, you should be really aggressive or something. Small blind lost a pot. Yeah, oh, and that's a good read. The small blind is awesome. You could actually find him on YouTube playing the WSOP main event like he was on TV. He was at the featured table. Like, this guy is really good. You ever hear of Pokar.com? That's him. So Morton said something interesting to me. He says, well, one thing is that you know that he's probably going to shove into you on the button almost always, if not always, the next hand. So you could basically kiss your big blind goodbye for the next hand. You might as well just pretend you have 400 less chips right now or something. But he also was saying, you want to tell him, what were the things that you said again? Remind me. Yeah. You can't shove the next hand because you can only shove really like the small blind limps into you, BVB, but that's not going to happen probably because of the really good guy who's going to be on the button. And then again, yeah, he'll probably shove again. So he blocks future shoves. You're also going to break to the final table soon if someone loses. Yeah, I mean, the context of this hand just says like you should shove wider than a normal 6. You have about 6 true big blinds here. You should shove wider than a normal 6 true big blind shove. Another thing too is that you could think about yourself as being in the hijack and not being under the gun, because that might make your brain think differently. Mm-hmm. So Morton has a point there about Alex Carr, who's amazing. Chris says, I had a very regular final table bubble a couple days ago. You weren't picking hands, but spots. Yes! Ha! That is a great way of describing this. Yeah, you're looking for spots, and you find the spots based on the context of the hand. Yeah. Well done. What do you mean no wider equals tighter range? What do you mean by that? Yeah, you can die now. Oh, gotcha. Yes. I understand. So Morton's saying he's going to put him on a wider range when he shoves. And another thing we can say is for all these different hands, as you know, shoving isn't necessarily the best play. You could always make other raise sizes, like Huyan does raise to calls. Morton and Chris make a lot of 3 and 4x raises, stuff like that. Yeah, exactly. Make it 1600. You could do half your stack. So, you know, when we were going through this, we were talking about just the range to do something with, not necessarily to shove, just your playing range, like what you would play, and then you can play it however you want to play it that you feel is optimal. So this is a sick hand. So based on all these things, he decided to shove. This is normally a fold. And sit and go whiz, I'm pretty sure would tell you to fold this. I'm pretty sure sit and go whiz would tell you to fold all of these. Even though we did fold some of them ourselves. But this is a perfect example. Maybe someone after can like put this in whiz and go take a picture and post it in the forum. This is a horrible shove in whiz, and I think it's a great shove in reality, especially considering the uniqueness and special nature of this hand. Yeah, game theory over whiz, for sure. Why spend $100 on whiz? Why not just spend $0 and just practice thinking well? Yeah, what is cynical whiz? Okay, so I think it's a great shove there. So that's the last hand. So summary, I think what I'm going to add what Chris said. Think about spots, not just shoves. I think is really good. Other summaries, think about the context of your shoves, or you know, your 3 or 4x or whatever you're doing with it. Not just the number of big blinds in position, but most importantly, don't be a shove bot. Because if you're a shove bot, you're just going to limit yourself to the success that shoving correctly can achieve. Shoving sit and go whiz correctly, stuff like that, you know. And that's kind of when a lot of people say like, oh, games are solved, or there's a ceiling on profits or something. It's mostly a bunch of shove bots who are saying that. But right here is a great example of something that's outside the box. And it seems really good. So don't be a shove bot. And I like what Chris said. Think about spots. Yes, yes. And let's add that here. So stage of game. And that's one of the biggest things in context too. Like we were talking about the context of a rebuy versus a normal 180. And Chris said, oh, there's 50 players left in it, But then since it was a rebuy, there's probably 100. And that's all stuff that relates to stage of the game. The same thing with the bubble spots with like 10-3 diamonds. I mean, that's one of the biggest things in context, if not probably the biggest thing maybe about it, just knowing where you are instead of just being a robot like so many people are. But if you're a Supernova Elite robot, that's okay because they make lots of money. Yeah, like early game, you'd be a little tighter. Final table, yeah. Maybe I can add that. I've said this to quite a few guys already. Maybe you guys have all seen it, but kind of the way I think sometimes is like once it hits 250, 300 big blind level, I'm like, okay, you know, the game starts basically, we could say. Then when you get to like 400, 600, and 800, it's like, okay, get more ag, right? Get more aggro. And then once it hits 1K, for me, that's like, oh yeah, like time to go, right? And you could also include that with like the 1200 to the 1600 big blind. And of course, in a 45 man, these are the blinds that are more important because they don't get as high as a 180, right? Yeah, that's what he said here. Yeah, and that's what I mean by this. Like once it hits 1K, I'm like, okay, I'm not missing spots. Like I'm going for it here, right? And then when I hit big blind 2K, I just get like psycho nuts, right? I was even telling Chris yesterday I become like a serial killer. You know, it's just like you get crazy. Yeah, and which by the way, that's the best show of all time, FYI. But basically in a 45 man though, you only get up to like big blind 3K at the highest, right? So the kind of psycho-ness comes a little bit earlier. That means the big blind 1200 level is more important in a 45 man than a 180 because you're closer to the money, or you're closer to the win, right? And the closer you get to the win, the more important hands get, and that's all caused by what Morton said, stage of the game. Yeah, cool. Any last questions about anything? I think that was good. Okay. Tell me a question, Morton, and then we'll do Chris's. Is that how you spell maximum in Denmark? Ah, yes. So now it's like that, like now value. So now value is, I guess that actually can kind of relate to this because the closer you are to the win, the more likely you are to get value right away. But the most common thing is where you can move up spots on purpose. Like if you want to try and limp to knock someone out. A great example is if someone says, hey, I will give you $10 now, or I'll give you $15 in a week, but you can expect it maybe. Right? And that's like expected value versus now value. Usually there's sometimes like in now value situations, sometimes like expected value is worth more, except the now value you're more likely to get. So it's kind of like, do you want $10 now, or do you maybe want $15 later, but you're not guaranteed $15? And different people will react to that different ways. Like you'll get a lot of gambly type people who would say, oh, well, I'm going for it. Give me that 15. Yeah. And then guys like me, I'm like, I kind of just want my $10, even though it's sometimes worth less, but it's more for sure, you know? So it's just kind of like it's like a personality trait, I guess. Maybe it's because I got to pay bills. Like sometimes EV doesn't pay the bills. Like you can't go like pay your cell phone bill and you're like, well, here's $100 EV. Like, sir, that doesn't count. But look at this red line. That's not money. But you could pay with now value because now value gives you money right away. assuming that your country is still eligible to play and you could cash out. Okay, so for the 5-10 hand, Chris says after the blinds pass us and we will be lucky enough to double up next round. When we're under the gun again, your situation will be same or worse and blinds will grow. Yeah, that's a great point. And that's why we can shove so wide from late position, because we help try to prevent that from happening. I agree you have to be really wide here. There's just certain hands that are absolute crap to shove, and 10-5 offsuit would be one of them. We were saying a way to look at it is you could shove ATC if you have twice the pot, which is like 1300, so this is very close. But since it's so early, the stage of the game is basically saying that this situation is not very important. And so you could fold at this point and just get hit with the blind and call off in the blind because it's so early in the game. Yeah, and that's good that you're looking at like the blinds hitting you and thinking about what happens because of that and thinking about feature hands. Like, that's really good. That's a great point too. We never even spoke about that. If there's less than 1 minute for another blind level, I'm going wider. Chris writes, and that's really important because that's context right there. Like, you know something is about to change, so you prevent it. You know, that's really, really good. I think it's like actually really smart. When I played, I did like the within 1 minute thing, if it said within, but I think less than 1 minute is good too. Any other questions that anybody has? I'll send you these notes, Puyon, so you can put them up in the forum. I think we're good. See you guys.